They thought he was just a janitor. They mocked him, dismissed him, until a life-or-death emergency forced everyone to see who he truly was. Today's story isn't just about saving a life. It's about shattering every prejudice you thought was harmless. The hallways of Cresthill Medical Center gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the faint scent of antiseptic hanging in the air like an invisible veil draped over every movement. The steady rhythm of rolling gurney wheels, the soft thud of rubber saws, and the hushed rush of whispered conversations wove together into the familiar background noise everyone had long grown used to. Dr. Micah Brooks, 38 years old, walked slowly down the main corridor, the badge-reading chief of cardiothoracic surgery swinging lightly across his chest. He wore a clean, navy blue set of scrubs, simple but neat, with creases still etched into the back of his shirt from back-to-back meetings that had stretched since morning. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, quietly registering every glance that darted his way, the kind of glances people assumed he wouldn't notice. A group of nurses passed by, their eyes sliding over him indifferently. One of them muttered under her breath, "Why is the janitor wandering so close to the oar?" Micah didn't turn his head. He was used to careless assumptions, used to being seen as something less than the sum of all he'd built. His shoes, though polished clean, weren't the flashy designer kind people expected to see on senior surgeons. And to them, that alone was enough to judge. Outside the physician's lounge, Tyler Morgan, a fresh-faced medical intern, leaned lazily against the doorframe, a coffee cup dangling in his hand, a smug look playing on his lips. As Micah approached, Tyler gave a half smirk. "Wrong floor, buddy. Janitor's lounge is downstairs." Micah paused for a beat, his gaze locked onto Tyler's, not with anger, not with arrogance, but with a chilling, measured calm. Without a word, he turned the handle and stepped into the physician's lounge, leaving Tyler frozen mid-smirk. The door swung open into a room bathed in the cold glow of fluorescent lights, highlighting the stagnant tension hanging thick in the air. A few sagging leather chairs, a polished wood table, and an old coffee machine filled the space. A setup that should have felt welcoming, but instead buzzed with an almost tangible chill as Micah entered. 4 or 5 doctors clustered around the table, sipping coffee and trading disjointed, thinly veiled jabs. One of them, Dr. Philip Landon, murmured just loud enough for Micah to hear, "Looks like even the janitors are using the doctor's lounge now." As Micah passed by, glances flicked toward him, sharp and fleeting, as if his very presence was an inconvenience no one wanted to acknowledge. A crumpled napkin was tossed toward the trash can near where he stood. It missed, landing right at his feet. The culprit, an older physician Micah vaguely remembered as Dr. Benjamin Hale, didn't even bother to apologize. He merely glanced at Micah with a look of detached indifference, then resumed his conversation with a colleague, as if he had just kicked a stray pebble aside. Micah bent down, not to pick up the crumpled napkin, but to tighten his grip on the folder in his hand. A sigh almost escaped him, but he swallowed it down. Without a word, Micah moved toward his locker, pulling out a thick stack of files, the complete set of documents prepared for a complex heart valve replacement surgery scheduled in just under an hour. None of the people in that room knew that the man they were dismissing would soon be leading the very team that would snatch a life from the brink of death. By the coffee machine, an older doctor, Dr. Victor Shaw, caught Micah's eye briefly. There was a flicker of recognition, but he said nothing, turning quietly away. In this world, sometimes silence was its own bitter kind of acknowledgement. Micah checked his watch. 45 minutes until surgery. Gripping his coffee cup tightly, spine straight, eyes steeled like forged iron, he turned and strode out of the lounge, leaving behind a room thick with unspoken prejudice, unaware they were about to witness something unforgettable. With the surgical folder clenched tightly in hand, Micah Brooks moved swiftly down the hallways of Cresthill Medical Center, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the figures around him slipping past like cold, disinterested gusts of wind. He didn't need to look up to feel the stares gathering around him. Quick glances, hushed snickers cutting through the air like invisible blades. "Why is the janitor wandering near thee or wing?" a nurse whispered, her voice laced with disdain. "Probably lost. Look at those scrubs," another doctor sneered, never pausing his scrolling on his phone. Micah heard it all. Every breath, every careless word, every darting glance. He was used to it. Through medical school, through brutal years of residency and internship, he had grown used to it. Used to being judged by the color of his skin, by the simplicity of his clothes, by anything but his skill. He just kept walking, his stride calm, his posture unshaken, as if the world around him were nothing but a pane of frosted glass. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He didn't beg for acceptance. Micah's silence wasn't surrender. It was the silence honed through scorching summers on the community basketball courts, through 36-hour shifts where a single misstep could end a career. A silence harder than steel, more unyielding than any meaningless apology. Far down the hall, Tyler Morgan, the intern from earlier, still shot furtive glances at him, a mix of resentment and growing unease flickering in his eyes. But no apology came. No one moved to correct their first impressions. Micah passed a cluster of doctors gathered near the surgical prep area. One of them, Dr. Meredith Carter, flashed him a forced smile, the kind that vanished the instant he stepped closer. She leaned toward her colleague and whispered, just loud enough for Micah to catch. "Bold, isn't he? Strutting around here like he actually belongs." This time, Micah felt a tight pang in his chest. Not from surprise, but from weary resignation. They saw the plain scrubs. They saw the color of his skin, but they didn't see the honors on his medical degree. They didn't see the hundreds of successful surgeries. They didn't see the hands that had pulled so many lives back from the brink. Micah clenched his fists briefly, his knuckles whitening, then released them. He didn't need to prove himself in these hallways reeking of prejudice. He would prove himself where words carried no weight, where only skill mattered, in the operating room. And today, those who mocked him would not just fall silent. They would be forced to look up. Micah Brooks hadn't yet reached the end of the hall when the overhead intercom sliced through the tension like a cold blade. "Code Blue, Room 3B. Code Blue, Room 3B. The shrill wail of the emergency alarm filled the corridor, cutting through the faint laughter still lingering in the doctor's lounge like a candle abruptly snuffed out. Without hesitation, Micah pivoted sharply. By instinct, his stride lengthened, steady, powerful, but not panicked. Down the hallway, nurses and interns scattered like startled bees. A clipboard clattered to the floor. A trembling hand fumbled for a phone, desperately trying to call a supervising physician. At the duty station, Dr. Hale poked his head out, his face pale. "Who's covering room 3B? A nurse, gasping for breath, shouted. "Dr. Carter, but he just left for a meeting. He won't be back for at least 20 minutes. No one moved toward room 3B. Only the frantic beeping of the monitor inside echoed into the hall. The desperate, chaotic rhythm of a heart fighting for its life. Amidst the paralysis, while others stood frozen, waiting for a miracle, Micah calmly set his coffee cup down on the windowsill, a strangely deliberate motion amid the chaos. He swiftly adjusted his name badge. Dr. Micah Brooks, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery. This time, he didn't avert his gaze. He faced the crowd, the same crowd that had seen him as little more than a shadow, and spoke in a voice low but unshakable. "I'll handle this case." The words fell like thunder on clear skies. A heartbeat of stunned silence. Then Dr. Benjamin Hale stammered, "You're a doctor?" Micah didn't answer. He simply jerked his head toward room 3B. "Prep the crash cart. I need a full cardiac emergency kit. 3 minutes." The crowd snapped awake as if slapped across the face. Nurses scrambled into action. Interns stumbled after them, wide-eyed. In the rush, a young female intern dropped the emergency kit, sending instruments clattering across the floor right at the entrance. Micah knelt down, not scolding, not shouting, and swiftly helped her gather the scattered tools. His gaze so gentle the young intern nearly burst into tears from a mix of shame and gratitude. Once they finished, Micah said quietly, "It's okay. First rule in an emergency, stay calm. Swap out the kit and get back here fast." His words weren't just for her. They were for everyone within earshot, still rattled and reeling. Micah pushed open the door to room 3B. Inside, a middle-aged man gasping desperately like a fish out of water, his skin turning an ominous shade of blue. The monitor shrieked warnings, plummeting blood pressure, chaotic heart rhythm. Micah pulled up his mask, his eyes narrowing into fierce focus. Start CPR. Prep the defibrillator. I'm intubating. No more whispers. No more sidelong glances. Everyone in room 3B now hung on his every word, watching, stunned, as the man they'd mistaken for a janitor commanded the room with the authority of a seasoned field general. The air inside 3B was so thick it could be sliced with a knife. The vitals monitor flashed an urgent crimson strobe, alarms wailing nonstop. The patient, Franklin Reese, 52 years old, fresh off a cardiac surgery, was sliding fast into respiratory collapse. Micah moved quickly to the bedside, issuing crisp orders while assessing the man. Oxygen mask, intubation setup ready. Get adrenaline. I need a 5 cubic centimeter syringe and the defib primed. The nurses exchanged hesitant glances, still fumbling, unsure whether to trust him yet. One of the senior residents, Dr. Gavin Lee, stammered, Wait, Dr. Brooks. Are you sure you want to? Micah didn't look up, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade. The patient doesn't have time for debates. Out in the hallway, doctors and staff crowded around the door, faces pressed against the glass in stunned disbelief. They couldn't fathom how the man they had dismissed that very morning was now the anchor holding chaos at bay. From the threshold, veteran physician Dr. Randall Blake hesitated, then stepped in, uncertainty etched across his features. He cleared his throat. Micah, do you want me to assist? Micah glanced at him briefly, his gaze firm. No, doctor. I reviewed Franklin's charts overnight. I know his anatomy inside and out. I'm taking responsibility for this case. A ripple of murmurs swept through the hallway. One of the interns nearly dropped her clipboard. Dr. Blake opened his mouth to argue, but seeing the calm fire in Micah's eyes, he stopped. After a moment's hesitation, he gave a silent nod and stepped aside. Micah signaled, charging 200 joules. First shock, room 3B transformed into a synchronized machine. No more hesitation, no more judgment, only orders and hope. The first shock jolted Franklin's body off the bed. The monitor still flashed a wild, erratic heartbeat. Micah stayed calm, issuing the next command. Continue compressions. Prepare for second shock. Every second dragged like an eternity. The entire team, some wiping sweat from their brows, others clenching trembling hands, kept their eyes locked on the man they hadn't even acknowledged an hour ago. Micah performed chest compressions with precision, his hands strong yet controlled, as if playing a melody he knew by heart. Second shock. Beep, beep, beep. The monitor steadied, sharp, rhythmic beeps filling the room. The air released all at once with a collective exhale. Franklin Reese was temporarily stabilized. The team scrambled to secure 4 lines, administer medications, and prep him for surgery under Micah's calm, unwavering directives. No one dared speak. They didn't have to. The truth was blindingly clear. The man they had dismissed, underestimated, Micah Brooks, had saved a life while the rest of them had stood frozen. Micah strode down the hallway toward the OR, his voice cutting through the stunned silence at the nurse's station. Prep operating room 2. Page Dr. Randall Blake for anesthesia. I'll be lead surgeon. A young nurse, Madison Clark, fumbled to grab the intercom phone, her hands trembling slightly. She had never heard him issue an order before, but somehow there was such gravity in his voice that she obeyed without thinking. Inside the OR, the fluorescent lights cast a sterile, bluish pall over everything. Franklin Reese lay on the table, his chest barely rising under the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. Micah scrubbed in, gowning up with fluid, practiced motions. There was no hesitation. Every movement spoke of experience, of mastery. Nurse Madison, once skeptical, now found herself watching in awe, a quiet reverence swelling in her chest she couldn't quite explain. Check vitals. BP heart rate. Blood pressures dropped, 55/30. Heart's erratic. Severe hypoperfusion. The attending nurse reported, urgency tightening her voice. Micah nodded, calm as if he were reading a well-worn book. Central line access. Blood products on standby. I need clamps, retractors, and the extracorporeal circulation system. Now. Dr. Blake, who had just arrived, stood momentarily stunned as he watched Micah not only lead the entire surgical team, but master every step of the protocol with razor-sharp precision. He glanced quickly at the patient's chart, then turned back to Micah. You're familiar with the entire surgical plan? Micah offered a slight smile. I studied Franklin's case all night. I know every vessel in his heart like the back of my hand. The surgery began. Every incision Micah made was precise to the millimeter. Under his hands, Franklin's heart was carefully dissected, the pooled blood meticulously cleared, and the torn valve repaired with an extraordinary level of microsurgical finesse. The heart monitor still beeped weakly, but there was a glimmer of hope. The rhythm was stabilizing. Increase dobutamine. Prepare for ECMO support, Micah commanded. The doctors and nurses around him were completely absorbed into his rhythm. No more whispers, no more judgment. Only total focus and seamless coordination, like a battalion moving under one brilliant general. Suddenly, a complication, a tiny coronary artery ruptured under the strain of increased pressure. A long, piercing beep filled the room, and tension slammed into every chest like a hammer. Madison's face turned ghostly pale. One of the residents nearly dropped a clamp. Micah's voice cut through the rising panic, short and steady. Clamp. 7 to 0 microsutures. I'll do it myself. Without the slightest trace of fear, he located the ruptured vessel, lowered the surgical microscope, and with an impossibly fine needle, stitched the fragile artery back together. One precise, flawless suture after another. Calm, unshakable, surgical artistry at its purest. 20 minutes later, the monitor emitted a steady, rhythmic beep, the sweetest music any of them had ever heard. Franklin's heartbeat had stabilized. His blood pressure climbed steadily back into safe ranges. Micah exhaled slowly, his voice even as ever. Close the chest. Begin post-op resuscitation. Transfer to ICU immediately. A heavy, reverent silence blanketed the OR. Madison, Dr. Blake, the entire team, they all knew they had just witnessed a masterclass. A performance of genius. A man they had almost discarded because of their own ignorant assumptions. As the surgical team wheeled Franklin Reese out of Operating Room 2, a wave of unexpected applause erupted from the gathered staff lined up outside the doors. Micah Brooks peeled off his surgical gloves, sweat still glistening on his brow, the surgical lights casting a sharp glow across his resolute face. He turned and saw a crowd gathering in the hallway. Nurses, doctors, even a few administrative managers, all frozen, a tangle of shock and confusion written across their faces. From among them, Dr. Henry Wilkins, Chief of Endocrinology, stepped forward, clutching a freshly delivered file from the hospital director's office. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. I have an announcement. The man who just saved Franklin Reese's life is Dr. Micah Brooks, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Cresthill Medical Center. A ripple of stunned disbelief swept through the crowd, like a cold gust rushing down the sterile hallway. Dozens of eyes widened in astonishment. Some younger nurses gasped, hands flying to their mouths. Several senior physicians, the same ones who had brushed past Micah without a glance earlier, flushed deep red with shame. At that moment, the hospital's PA system crackled to life. The voice of hospital director Dr. Charles Whitmore booming out, measured and solemn. Attention all staff. Effective immediately, Dr. Micah Brooks is appointed director of the Diversity and Patient Respect Training Program across Cresthill Medical Center. Any acts of discrimination, in any form, will now be subject to strict disciplinary action. For a moment, the entire hospital seemed to hold its breath. Micah Brooks, the man they had once mistaken for a janitor, brushed aside, and underestimated, was not only a department chief, but now the face of a movement that would redefine Crestill's culture. Across the hall, Nurse Madison Clark clutched her hands to her chest, her face radiant with genuine admiration. Tyler Morgan, the intern who had once laughed at Micah, stood with his head bowed low, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Micah, as calm as ever, walked steadily out of the surgical wing. No words of reprimand, no gloating, simply by the weight of his silence and the undeniable power of his achievements. He left the entire hospital to wrestle with its own shame and awakening. Behind him, Dr. Benjamin Hale, the gray-haired physician who had casually tossed trash at Micah just hours earlier, jogged after him breathless. Dr. Brooks, I'm truly sorry. Micah stopped. He turned, his gaze deep and unshakably composed, saying everything that needed to be said without a trace of anger. Respect, he said simply, voice low and firm, shouldn't come from titles or uniforms. It must start from the heart. Without waiting for a response, he turned and continued down the hallway, leaving behind a trail of awestruck and humbled faces, bathed in the soft golden light of the late afternoon sun filtering through the hospital's tall glass windows. That day at Cresthill Medical Center, they didn't just save a patient's life. They saved the very soul of their profession, thanks to one man they had almost failed to truly see. The third-floor hallway of Cresthill Medical Center was steeped in an unfamiliar stillness. Gone were the hushed, mocking whispers. Gone were the scornful glances that had brushed past just that morning. In their place hung a heavy silence, thick with shame and unspoken regret, dragging down every footstep that passed through the sterile corridor. Dr. Meredith Carter, the very doctor who had made a careless comment about Micah earlier that day, and who had been absent during the emergency at 3B, was now standing just outside the staff lounge, clutching a coffee cup so tightly her knuckles whitened. When she spotted Micah in the distance, reviewing patient charts with quiet focus, she swallowed hard and slowly approached. Dr. Brooks, her voice was so soft it nearly got lost beneath the steady beeping of the monitors. Micah looked up, his gaze calm and unreadable. Meredith extended the coffee toward him, her hands trembling slightly. I was wrong. I'm so sorry for judging you before I ever knew who you were. And thank you for saving our patient while I was away. It's black coffee, just a little sugar. I heard you liked it that way. Micah took the cup with a small, thin smile, offering no words in return. But that single gesture was enough for Meredith to breathe a little easier, though she knew the path to redemption would be long and uphill. Inside the staff lounge, once buzzing with biting jokes and thinly veiled mockery, the air was now thick, almost stifling. Tyler Morgan, the young intern, sat slumped in a chair, running his hands through his hair over and over, as if trying to scrub away the shame of his earlier behavior. When Micah entered the lounge, Dr. Philip Landon, the one who had joked about janitors, stepped awkwardly toward the coffee station where Micah was standing. Sweat beaded on Landon's forehead. The discomfort was practically radiating off him. Dr. Brooks, I honestly didn't know. Landon stammered. Micah turned, the overhead lights glinting off the badge pinned firmly to his chest. Dr. Micah Brooks, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery. That's exactly the problem, Micah said, voice steady, razor sharp without being angry. No one asked. No one cared to know. Everyone was too busy judging. Dr. Landon lowered his head, looking like a schoolboy caught cheating on a final exam. From across the room, Tyler watched the scene unfold, a shiver creeping up his spine, part shame, part a new and unsettling understanding of what true dignity under pressure looked like. Just then, the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. A bewildered pizza delivery guy stood there, holding up 3 giant boxes, looking thoroughly out of place amid the somber, stiff crowd. Who ordered 3 large pizzas, extra barbecue toppings for the surgery department? A few scattered chuckles broke out. The heavy tension in the hallway lifted slightly, like a window cracked open after a long winter. Logan, ever quick on his feet, jogged over to grab the pizzas, then turned back to Micah with a nervous, earnest grin. "Lunch is on me today, and I'm starting by learning how to see people with my heart, not just my eyes." Micah looked at the young man, fumbling with his words, a softness flickering briefly across his features. Instead of replying, he simply patted Logan lightly on the shoulder, a silent acknowledgement, and continued down the hall toward the OR, ready to begin the surgery he had scheduled for earlier, but had postponed 2 hours because of the code blue emergency. Behind him, the stairs were no longer sharp with judgment, but filled with a new, quiet respect. On that day, though Cresthill Medical Center remained hushed, it was relearning, how to truly see the people it once brushed aside without a second thought. By late afternoon, as the soft, slanting light of dusk poured through the tall glass windows of Cresthill Medical Center, the hospital's tension had lifted slightly, leaving behind a strange, almost sacred silence. Micah Brooks walked slowly down the third-floor hallway, his polished name badge catching the pale overhead lights against the crisp white of his lab coat. Every nurse, doctor, and staff member who crossed his path gave a small, respectful nod. Not out of fear, but from a budding reverence they were only just beginning to understand. Near the coffee station, Madison Clark, the nurse who had once doubted his place, waited anxiously, her hands twisted together like a student awaiting the results of a final exam. As Micah approached, she took a deep breath and pulled a small card from the pocket of her scrubs. In neat, careful handwriting, it read, "I'm sorry I didn't see who you really are." Micah accepted the card, silent for a long breath. His eyes softened slightly, but there was no trace of anger, no sharp words, no need for a grand, scathing rebuke. Only a calmness, the kind forged from years of weathering judgment and invisibility with dignity. He folded the card, slipped it into his coat pocket, and met Madison's eyes. His voice was low, steady but not cold. "Next time, read the name tag first. Just one short sentence. No need for anything more. No need to dredge up the past or demand apologies with fanfare." Madison nodded, her heart pounding in her chest, knowing deep down this wasn't just a lesson for today. It was a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. Farther down the hall, Dr. Philip Landon, Dr. Benjamin Hale, Dr. Meredith Carter, Tyler Morgan, and even Dr. Victor Shaw all quietly watched the exchange. No one spoke, but within them, something had shifted. The shame had settled deep, ripening into a quiet, solemn vow. A vow to change, a vow to see. Micah's brief but profound story that day had planted seed. That a real apology must come from the heart. That true respect begins by truly seeing the person standing before you. And at Cresthill, that seed was beginning to take root, quietly, stubbornly, in the smallest of actions. The next morning, the air at Cresthill felt noticeably fresher. Micah Brooks entered the hospital just as the clock in the hallway struck 6:15 a.m. The soft morning light filtered through the frosted windows, casting a gentle golden hue across the polished floors. He walked with measured steps, the name badge that read Dr. Micah Brooks, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, no longer overlooked or forgotten. The gazes that followed him were different now, no longer laced with suspicion or casual judgment, but filled with quiet, genuine respect. The sound of his footsteps echoed lightly against the tiled floor, each step exuding an unshakable calm. There was no need to argue, no need to raise his voice. The truth had spoken, far louder and stronger, through his actions and the lives he had saved. On the second floor, a hastily called meeting among department heads was underway. They discussed organizing a formal ceremony to honor Micah and restructuring the hospital's entire staff training on professional conduct. But Micah needed no grand ceremonies. He knew the greatest victory wasn't found in public applause. It was in the silent shifts within the hearts of those who had once been wrong. In a quiet corner of the building, Tyler Morgan, the intern who had once dismissed him in the lounge, was now scribbling something into a small notebook. Never judge someone by their appearance. Look deep enough to truly see. Outside the hospital grounds, Mr. Raymond Clark, the elderly janitor, pushed his worn-out cleaning cart along the path. When he saw Micah from a distance, he lifted his cap slightly. No words were needed. Two men, two lives once judged by their outward image, shared a discreet smile, a silent greeting from those who understood the real weight of quiet perseverance. Micah entered the staff lounge, heading straight to his locker. He opened it, retrieved a thick patient file, but before stepping into the day's work, he paused, catching his reflection in the small mirror affixed to the inside of the door. Not to fix his appearance, but to remind himself, no matter how the world chooses to see him, true dignity is something no one can take away unless he lets it go himself. And so, under the soft beams of morning light spilling through the hospital windows, Dr. Micah Brooks stepped out into the patient wards, carrying with him the greatest victory of all, a quiet, unshakable triumph, won through skill, character, and unwavering resolve, without ever needing to shout.